Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing another concealed carry training session, and we're going to be considering a very important question that comes up a lot of times in my concealed carry classes. Should you or would you interfere with a police action to save a cop's life? Okay, so a lot of times people say, hey, they just ask part of the question, right? They'll say, would you save a cop's life? Most people would say yes, okay, but they're only asking half the question, because in almost all cases, in order to save that officer's life, you are interfering with a police action. They're in the middle of doing something, and perhaps, whatever they were trying to do is not going so well, and you are interfering with a police action. Okay, so this is something that needs to be addressed, and this is a question that a lot of times, I will hear it randomly discussed across the internet. It's a question that I will pose during the concealed carry training classes that I do. It is a question that I have asked lots of police officers at different gun ranges, because basically, as a range safety officer, over many years I've gotten to supervise many ranges. A lot of times cops go to those ranges. A lot of times I'll get friendly with them, and I'll start picking their brains, getting opinions. Okay, and I've also, aside from the cops, I have also asked this question from an actual attorney, right? The legal service that I use to ask these type of questions is Lawshield. Okay, it's $10 a month. Okay, and with the promo code, you get like an additional month, or you get 2 free months depending on your state, or you get $20 off. So this is the law service that I use to ask these type of questions. Now, I have a regular attorney that I could ask these type of questions of, but a regular lawyer charges $250 an hour. Okay, these guys only charge $11 per month. Okay, so you better believe these are the guys I'm going to go ask these type of questions. So I asked these questions, and basically they gave me a very, and I did this actually in person at one of the seminars. They gave me a very legalese type of answer that basically said, well, the law, allows you to use deadly force to protect somebody's life. Doesn't matter what they are. But after quoting me what the law allows, in normal discussion, they say, hey, listen, you're interfering with a police action. Okay, if you do anything wrong, if you make a mistake, you're in trouble. Okay, so without telling me directly not to get involved, the advice of this lawyer, and actually other lawyers I've asked over the years at the gun range, is generally mind your own business. Now, I'm gonna go through a whole bunch of things, because there's the lawyer's response, but I'm also gonna tell you guys what the cops told me, right? Because one of the things, like, a lot of people want to be virtuous, right? Especially at these at these concealed carry classes that I have done or attended over the years. It seems like I always have a lot of very virtuous people in the class that want to do the right thing, want to help where they can, and a lot of times they will jump up and say yes, they would definitely get involved, they'll definitely help. But there's a lot of details that I think they haven't thought through. And one of the things I will tell them was, well, have you ever asked a cop or a number of cops what they would want you to do? Okay, because I've actually done that. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of things that I have considered. And as far as asking the cops, if a lot of times it comes down to how I pose the question. Because if like I mentioned earlier, if I ask the question, do you want people to interfere to save a police officer's life? They say yes. But if I add, do you want them to interfere in a police action to save an officer's life? Then they start like, I don't, most of them will come around in the end, and they will say, be very careful, because if you make a mistake, you're gonna regret it. You're gonna spend the rest of your life regretting it. Okay, so that's what, in the end, when I press them, they all come around to saying. So here's a couple of things that I wrote down for you to consider, because I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you to get involved or not get involved. But I think I've after having talked to concealed carriers, police officers, lawyers, I've compiled a bunch of things that I think that you need to consider. Okay, so the first thing that we need to consider is the perception. Okay, your perception, right, of what is happening may not be correct. Okay, you might think that the officer is being strangled, while what's actually happening is that they're in the process of putting cuffs on the person, or they're trying to get him into some type of a hold so they can cuff him. So your perception of what's happening may not be the correct one. I mean, be it because of your view, because of the lighting condition, because of something you misheard. Okay, your perception might be incorrect. That's something that you have to accept, because you're not there. You didn't see this thing from the beginning to the end. You don't know if your perception, the way that you think things are unfolding, is actually the correct, what's really happening. Okay, so the other thing to consider is the officer's perception. Okay, you think that you're going there to help the officer. The officer might think that you're going there to help the guy that he's struggling with. Okay, so the officer's perception might not be correct. Right, he might mistake you for being, a partner of the guy that he's trying to arrest, or subdue, or whatever's going on there. Okay, so that's an important thing to consider. Your perception might be wrong, but the officer's perception might also be incorrect in how they perceive your actions. Okay, other thing to consider is the perception of other officers coming onto the scene. Okay, again, they don't know how this thing started, and how it escalated, and how it got to the point where it's at. At the point that they arrive and they observe, they might perceive you to be the bad guy, okay, or trying to hurt the officer that you might in fact be trying to save. Okay, and then of course the other thing is the perception of other people watching, other concealed carriers, what they think might be going on. Right, you think you're going there to help the officer. The other concealed carriers, some of which, there might be a very wide range in their experience levels, in their backgrounds, in their experiences. Who knows how they're going to perceive what you're doing. Okay, so just in this one section alone, okay, there's a lot of doubt. Right, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Okay, the way that you perceive things, or the way that other people perceive things. Okay, so next thing to consider is the public image that is being projected here. Right, so let's say you successfully help this officer that's in need. Okay, how do you think that the officer might feel about this after the action? Right, because here's the thing. At that moment, he might be grateful that you saved his life. Okay, but then when he gets back to the police station, now he's got to deal with the fact that, hey, maybe he made a mistake. I mean, why did he need your help? What mistakes did he make that led up to you needing to help him? Also, how is his police department going to, perceive and think of the fact that he needed help? So there's a big incentive for the officer, okay, to come around to convincing himself, right, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that, he really didn't need help, that if, he was allowed to do his job, he would have done his job. Okay, so that's an important thing to consider. Okay, now the other thing to consider is, aside from the officer feels about the image being projected, right, there's also the department. Okay, how does the entire department feel about one of their officers needing help from a civilian, right, who, especially in a lot of the cities, a lot of these Democrat-run cities, they really look down on armed civilians, on concealed carriers. Okay, they really look down on them, and the fact that they needed your help doesn't make them look good, or at least that's how they might feel about it. I mean, I don't know, but that's a possibility, especially in the cities. Out in the countryside, maybe it might be different, but in the cities, if the police need help from civilians, the perception is that the police aren't doing a very good job. That's the way that might go across in the cities, right, or in highly populated areas, or even medium populated areas. Basically, in any town where you don't know the officer by, name, just by if you look at his face and you don't know his first name, last name, if you never met his family, you really don't know the guy. Okay, he really doesn't know you. So again, these are all psychological things that are going to come into play. Okay, so from the perspective of the system, and here we're talking about the police state. Okay, consider this. Consider that they might be willing to sacrifice one officer to preserve the police state, right? So they don't like the idea of in a lot of these cities of civilians carrying firearms, even though now they're being forced to issue carry permits. They don't like it. Lots of police officers and police unions might start thinking along lines that, hey, if civilians are carrying firearms, perhaps society might start thinking that they don't need as many cops. So it might be a question of job security, all right? So consider that possibility. And again, this isn't specific to one area. This is across the board, across the entire police state, okay? That the system, right, the police system across the board might be willing to sacrifice one officer to preserve the system, okay? So just something to consider, okay? I'm not saying that that's the thing, that's the answer, but just something to consider, think about, drop your own opinions in the comment section. If I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, that's fine. Tell me why, So let's talk about mistakes, okay? So you're responding to a situation which you really don't know anything about, you weren't prepared for. There's a good chance that you might make a mistake, aside from just the perception mistake that I talked about earlier. But you might make a judgment call, right? You might use too much force or too little force, right? That might end up getting you killed. You might say the wrong thing, all right? Just because you're under stress, you're not sure what, if it's not something you prepared for, you might say the wrong thing, okay? So you're going to be heavily penalized for mistakes, especially in a Democrat-run city, okay? So you don't get a reward for doing everything correct. You're not going to get a reward for saving the officer's life, but if you make one mistake, they're gonna penalize you for it, right? At the very least, they'll pull your carry permit, but they might go further. They might say that, hey, you murdered this guy or whatever, So again, these are all things to consider. So let's talk about make sure I didn't miss anything. There's a lot here, so I make notes, and I'm out in the park, so I don't have my board with me today. Okay, so let's talk about, especially if you're in one of these Democrat-run cities, okay? As a concealed carrier, you're pretty much considered an enemy of the state, okay? Simply by having a carry permit, it's a Democrat-run city, they're going to assume that you are something other than a Democrat, okay? And it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Libertarian or some type of conservative or one or the other, if you're not a Democrat, if they're going to assume that you're somebody from the other side. And I mean, how do they know if you're a Democrat or Republican? They're going to assume that if you have a carry permit, especially if it's a city where most people don't have carry permits, they're going to assume that you're not on their side, okay? Now, we're trying to change that simply by trying to recruit more Democrats to our side, so that simply having a carry permit doesn't signal you out as being a Democrat or a Republican or a conservative or whatever. But at the moment, in most of these Democrat-run cities, a lot of people are going to assume that if you're a gun owner with a carry permit, that you're in some other political party other than what they're in. Okay, and at this point, it's basically we are in a cold civil war, basically. Okay, it's not even a question of. I don't think it's even a question so much anymore of what Democrats stand for or what they don't stand for, because over the years they've switched roles, right? At one point they were against immigration, now they're for open borders, so they've switched roles. So to them it's just a matter of power, right? They wanna keep and grow their power. So that's why it's not a question of issues, it's a question of whether they perceive you to be on their side or not on their side. So politics is going to, those type of politics are going to play a role in this. Okay, so that's just the reality of this, right? We are in a cold civil war. Okay, so if you get involved as a concealed carrier, the politicians, the upper brass of the police department is going to perceive you as an enemy of the state, somebody that's not of their political party, and they're going to look to punish you in any way they can. And again, as I mentioned earlier, they're not going to be appreciative of the fact that you saved an officer's life, because for them it's like, well, again, they were willing to sacrifice that officer to preserve their power, to preserve the system. And you proving that an individual with a gun has the ability to save somebody's life is contrary to their narrative, basically. Okay, so they're going to go against you. So any mistake you made, they're going to punish you for it. Okay. Okay. So as far as you being an enemy of the state, in a lot of these Democrat-run cities and states, they're giving you a carry permit because they now have to. They don't want you to have one. If they could stop you, they would stop you. So I don't want you guys to think for a second that just because they gave you a carry permit, they have now deputized you. Okay. And this is kind of like an attitude that a lot of times I will see, even like in other states, like in Republican states, right? They once a lot of times when people are getting their carry permit, I'll sitting there in class. They're like, they got a big smile on their face. They think that they've, I don't know, broken into like the next class up or something. Okay, that's not the case. Okay, just because you got a carry permit to the government, you're not part of them, right? You're not part of the system. If anything, you're now that much more their enemy. Okay, so that's an important thing to keep in mind as a concealed carrier. Don't think that you've been deputized. If anything, the exact opposite. Okay. The other thing to be aware of is that if in a situation where you do come to the aid of an officer, to save his life, okay, in the interrogation process that's going to happen after, the interrogator is basically going to just come into this conversation in the back of her mind. He's going to be thinking that you had some type of a hero complex. Okay, so interrogators like to put people into categories, right? So they got kind of categories for everyone. So as a concealed carrier that tried to save somebody's life, okay, other than your own, you are automatically being put into that hero category, and that's where they start working from. Okay, and again, that to them, from their perspective, that has a very negative connotation. So this isn't hero as in good hero. This is hero as in wannabe cop. All right, so that's how they're going to perceive it. Okay, let's do I want to go there yet? All right, let's stick to that point for a second. We all know that if we're in a self-defense type of situation, we keep our mouth shut. We don't talk to the police. Okay, that applies to this situation. Okay, don't think for a second that because you saved an officer's life, all of a sudden you're on their team and they're going to accept you as being part of their team. If you decide that that's what you want to do, absolutely keep your mouth shut. First of all the things we've talked about in other videos, reholster the gun as quickly as possible, because other people coming onto the scene don't know what happened. You don't want to see other people seeing you hold a gun. Reholster the gun, preserve the evidence. If it's moved, make sure that you report that aspect of it. Put in a call to 911, because again, you don't know if somebody else, the officer may not be capable of it. Let them know that there was an officer involved, but just don't go into any details, right? Tell them that you had to defend yourself, you had to protect the life of somebody else. Don't give any detail. When the cops get there, make sure that they don't see you holding a gun. Make sure it's holstered. Preserve the evidence. So if there's guns, knives, your shell cases, if they get moved around by EMS, make sure that that's reported. Okay. And the other thing is look for the witnesses. and be ready to point out witnesses to the police when they arrive. Other than that, make sure you get a prepaid lawyer. Don't start blabbing. Don't think for a second that just because you saved the cop's life, that all of a sudden you're on their team. They're gonna perceive you that way. Okay. Just like any other self-defense situation, keep your mouth shut. Get the lawyer. And again, the one that I use just because they're cheap. All right. Now, I've talked about these guys before. For $10 a month. And then with the promo code, you get an extra month. In some states, you get 2 extra months, and then like $20 off when you sign up. It ends up being something like $130 to $150 a year, depending on what the discounts get you. So for like $130 to $150 a year, you got a lawyer on call. That's a lot better than having to call up your wife or your mother and say, hey, I need you to get me a lawyer right away. So your wife or your mother's got to be looking for a lawyer. She's got to show up with like a $2,000 retainer just so they'll look at your case. You don't want that. You want to have a prepaid lawyer, okay? What was I saying? I lost my train of thought. Oh, so I was just saying, make sure that at that point you get your lawyer on the phone, let them do the talking for you, even though you were there. Hey, listen, if the cop is there, he can make a report. Really, and the truth is that if the officer is involved in a defensive shooting, the police unions tell them not to say anything for like 48 hours, right? They're basically, the union lawyers or police lawyers show up. They don't make a statement until 2 or 3 days later. All right, there's a reason for that. Okay, so give yourself the same courtesy that the police give to themselves. Okay, now the other thing. Lastly, I want to talk about. Fine. It sounds great you want to save lives, right? You want to be a hero, right? If that's the thing you want to do. But consider this. Consider what was the officer doing. First of all, you don't know anything, right? What were they in the process of doing? Were they trying to enforce a red flag law? Okay. Were they trying to do some type of stop and frisk, for no reason? So you don't know exactly how this thing got involved. There's lots of instances where police were not doing the right thing, right? Whether it's because they were told to do so or because they were doing it on their own. So again, you don't know how the situation involved. You don't know if that officer made a mistake or if that officer was doing something unconstitutional. Okay, I'm not saying that they are, but if they were, you wouldn't know that. Okay, and the other thing to consider is, there's been so many cases over the many years where officers have been involved in some type of corruption, right? When they go to arrest them, who do you think shows up to arrest them, right? Other officers. So you see an officer. Oh, I got to pause this because the siren come through here. Okay, so as I was starting to say, if an officer is involved in some type of wrongdoing and a warrant is issued for his arrest, which has happened, right? Who do you think they're going to send out to arrest them, and what do you think that might look like? Okay, so again, you don't know what's happening. You don't know who the good guys are and necessarily who the bad guys are. You might have 2 cops on the ground struggling there. So I know it's highly unlikely, but hey, it's a possibility. Okay. So again, some other interesting things to consider that have been in the news lately. I don't know what's going on there, but were they trying to confiscate somebody's bump stock? Was the officer trying to confiscate somebody's pistol brace, their FRT, their force reset trigger, or perhaps their polymer 80 frame, right? So, these are all constitutional violations, okay? So again, I don't know how this thing started. I don't know how they got to the point, but there's a lot of things that could be wrong there on both sides, and without knowing all the information, I would be very cautious about getting involved. Okay. Other thing to ask yourself is, what kind of cops are we talking about here? Right? Are we talking about unconstitutional ATF agents? Are we talking about corrupt FBI? Right, like framing people like General Flynn and Whitmer kidnapping and that kind of stuff, right? Are those the type of officers that we're talking about? Are we talking about, what's the other one over here? Are we talking about like CIA, NSA officers spying on the American public? Okay, or are we talking about you know, like just local cops harassing people for open and carrying, even in areas where it's legal, right? Because like in Pennsylvania, for example, open carry is legal, and in Philadelphia, a lot of times people will open carry with a permit, and there've been lots of cases over the years with police officers harassing open carriers in Philadelphia, even though it is perfectly legal. And then basically they'll bring him in, they'll arrest him, bring him in, they'll lose their guns, then the guy go through a whole trouble trying to get the guns back. So again, that's just harassment, okay? So again, what type of officers are you trying to save? Were they actually doing their job? Were they being constitutional, or were they just basically harassing, you know, innocent people? Okay, so I don't know the answer to that. Okay, I'm not, you know, I'm just saying, before I go and I help somebody, I would like to know. I would like to know those answers. Okay, and you know, basically, there's no rewards in this society the way it is today. There's no rewards for, in this case, for helping somebody. There's lots of penalties for doing the wrong thing, even if it's a tiny little mistake. You can spend the rest of your life behind bars for that tiny little mistake, even though you had good intentions. Okay, let's see, anything else worth mentioning here? Okay, with regards to police, you know, one of the impression that and this isn't like in a specific area, this isn't even a specific state, but across the board, right? What I have, the feeling that I've gotten over the years, right, over 50 years, right, I've been alive, 51 years I've been alive, is that police are primarily interested in protecting the police state. Okay, they, you know, I mean, that's the feeling that I get. When they say protect and serve, it's protect and serve the police state. Now, as far as the politicians, the way I see them is, they see the politicians as kind of working for them. Like, they use them to get additional funding, to secure their paychecks, their pensions. Long term, my gut feeling is that if the police state could do away with the politicians and take control of the system, they would. Okay, that's just my opinion on that. I'm not saying that is the correct opinion, but that's just the opinion I have formed over the years. And especially like when you look at like the FBI, you know, from the perspective that I get, right, especially with the investigation against Trump, they were essentially trying to select the president. They were trying to criminalize Trump so that they could put a president in power that they felt was favorable to them, right, to their power, basically. Okay, so that really soured me a lot against the overall police state. So again, some things to consider. Now, that all said, over the years, especially as a range safety officer, I have gotten to know many officers that individually are very nice people. They're constitutional, you know. So people that I would be inclined to, if I had a full understanding of the situation, all right, full understanding, I would be inclined to help them and save their life. Okay, but you know, the thing to consider is you're never going to have a full understanding of the situation. And when you ask them what they would want, okay, you know, again, depending on how you pose the question, lots of times they will tell you that, you know, a lot of times they'll be honest. You know, they have actually told me, you know, your best thing to do is just mind your own business, because there's too much of a chance that you might make a mistake. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's been, you know, I went into a lot of details. I was trying not to go at it from a perspective of you know, of being either a bootlicker, right, as they say, or being anti-cop. A lot of what I told you guys, the source is from actual police themselves, okay, where they have said, mind your own business, don't interfere with police business, for lots of the reasons that I gave you guys. So let me know what you guys think. If you disagree with me, I'll talk to you all soon.